No one is victimized on a systemic level when you have laws that punish one race that is more likely to use one type of drug more than another race, when it's actually been shown that among kids our age, white people and suburban kids are more likely to use drugs in schools than black inner city kids.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and you're right, we disagree on everything. So, so to begin with, I don't believe in the concept of mass incarceration because that implies that the police are going into black communities with a lasso, rounding people up and taking them to jail for no reason. I don't think that's happening. Every person who is in jail has had a trial or a plea. The idea that people are just being grabbed and thrown into prison to keep alive some sort of prison industrial complex where the prison masters are the ones running the system, I don't see evidence of that. As far as the 1986 law, I think that it's important to put this into context. And the context is that that law was originally pressed by black legislators from inner cities who were sick of watching crack cocaine destroying their communities. And the reason for the disparity is because crack was more easily distributable and significantly more effective than powder cocaine. It is also the fact that the vast majority of people who are distributing and using crack cocaine were black. You know it's a drug that the vast majority of people who distribute and use are white? Crystal meth. Guess what the penalty is for 1 ounce of crystal meth versus 1 ounce of crack cocaine? They are identical. They are identical because they are easily distributed and they are distributed in similar forms. So the idea that this was just some sort of attempt to grab black people off the street and throw them in jail for no reason so we could have a permanent underclass of people with no fathers, this seems to me like a giant conspiracy theory with little evidence to support it. As far as the idea that these communities would be better if we just release people onto the streets, so I think it's important, again, to note the statistics here. The fact is the vast majority of people who are in jail for drug crimes are in for distribution, not merely for use. The idea that it's a black kid who's just smoking crack on the street who's getting picked up by the cops and thrown in jail, the justice system doesn't have time for that. Okay, the vast majority of even possessions that are pled down from distributions. Now, I've said earlier, I'm not in favor of the drug war. Okay, but I can tell you something. The people who are currently acting in criminal fashion in the drug war aren't going to be out acting as model citizens as a general rule. A lot of those people are going to be committing other crimes because this has been the history of the United States. When you make a substance illegal, the people who are criminals were criminals before and they're criminals after. Al Capone was not going to turn into a banker after Prohibition ended. And the same thing is true for a lot of the people who are committing criminal acts by distributing illicit substances. So I think that to pretend that the epidemic of single motherhood is going to end, all these guys are just going to decide, you know what, I've decided to marry that girl, I'm going to stay home, and it's going to be like Leave It to Beaver. When they were dealing crack on the corner to 12-year-old kids the day before, I think that's a little bit of a myth.
Yeah, I want to respond to one specific point. You were saying the idea that cops are going into black communities and lassoing up black people is completely ridiculous. How would you explain the amount of black people in jail currently?
Higher numbers of black people committing crimes.
Well, that's not the case.
It is absolutely the case.
It's been statistically shown that white people use drugs just as much as black
people. And as I said, people are generally not arrested for using drugs. They're generally arrested for drug distribution in the drug war.
Do white people not distribute drugs?
Well, they don't in terms of proportionality with regard to, I mean, the idea that, again, you need to show me the statistics on drug distribution. So the burden is on you to prove the disparity, not on me to prove the non-disparity.
I don't see how either of us we should have an equal distribution of trying to prove the disparity.
Well, you're the one who's accusing the criminal justice system of wild injustice. Again, I don't have the statistics in front of me, so it's hard for me to cite statistics on that particular aspect of drug distribution. But you'd have to show that there are a bunch of white people who are distributing drugs to the same extent as the black people in jail, and then tell me that they're not being treated equally. You can't just suggest that drug use is equal to drug distribution, because statistically it's not.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I think that institutional racism in and of itself, first of all, I would say that the majority of the people that do bring up institutional racism do also have solutions as to how to combat it. But
which invariably involve encroaching on other people's liberty. But yes.
Well, I would just say that there is kind of, again, I feel like you're painting a wide and diverse group of people with the same brush and saying that if you can't point to a policy or if you can't point to a person, then you're just wasting everyone's time. And I think that a lot of people are trying to point to policies, and while I think that the idea of pointing to a racist person is fundamentally in contrast with the idea of institutional racism, because institutional racism grapples with implicit bias in the society as a whole, or not like a ghost in the machine, but in individuals.
Unless you're connecting that to a policy, it's a cop-out. Because now we're ghost hunting again. If you just said to me, we have a problem in American society, income inequality, right, is a problem in American society. If you just gave me any problem, and I said, well, that's the Bilderberg's fault, right? That's the fault of the Bilderbergs, right? It's a conspiracy, it's the fault of the Bilderbergs, right? There's all these conspiracy theories about the Bilderberg group. Now, let's say that it's the Bilderberg's fault, or it's the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's whatever it is. There's some conspiracy out there. You would say to me, that's not useful because what are you even talking about? When you say institutional racism, it's too broad. You at least have to name me the institution. Which one is the racist one? Which institution is racist? Tell me which, so we can fight it, seriously, so we can fight it together. Just shouting slogans like institutional racism it's not effective. Shouting white privilege is not effective. I want to be on your side. I do. I want to fight racists. I think racism is, I think racist behavior is evil. I want to fight it with you, but I can't fight it if you're not showing me what it is. And we have to decide together if the policies you're proposing will alleviate racism or exacerbate racism. And it turns out, I think, that a lot of the policies proposed by the left, I think institutional racism is is usually a lever for proposing a policy that is actually unpalatable to freedom, and then castigating people on the other side of that policy as being in league with the institutional racism. The policies are either good or bad without regard to words like institutional racism, is what I'm saying. Honestly, I'd love to sit down and talk with you for an hour about it because it's a worthwhile conversation, and I think we could actually get somewhere with it. But I think that slogans generally tend not to be particularly effective in getting us to solutions.
Okay. Thank you. We have time for 2 quick questions.
Okay. I just have one.
Oh,
okay. I just want to disagree with Lauren there. I feel a heavy amount of animosity towards you, but thank you for bringing this ignorance to our campus, because I think it's important when you hear people from different sides, and because of the First Amendment, I can say that, right?
Well, thank you.
But I do have a real question in there.
Your video, because there was no question mark at the end. This was going to be a real downer.
In your video where you debunk white privilege, you talk about how white privilege is a made-up term by privileged minorities. So I was wondering if you can elaborate on some of the privileges that you think minority groups have.
Okay, so in privileges in law, so when I say privilege, I'm actually going to talk about legal standing. Okay, so affirmative action is a privilege. Affirmative action is a privilege. Subprime mortgages designed to appeal to minority recipients without proper qualifications, that is a privilege. Now, those are a couple examples of privilege. Privilege would also be the police being told that they can't police in communities the same way they would in other communities because they don't understand the problems of minority communities. That's a privilege. By the way, these privileges are not helpful, but as an overall matter. But it is certainly it's very difficult for me to see how it's not a privilege to get a lower score on the SAT than the Asian guy who's living in exactly the same circumstance. He gets penalized 50 points. You get 230 points on the SATs. That is definitionally a privilege. So there's one. Do you disagree?
Yeah, but I don't want